Welcome to the Super Gamer Podcast. Welcome to the new Super Gamer Podcast, episode 171. Our guest this week is a game studies researcher, a content creator, a streamer, a PhD student at Retsumeikan University in Kyoto, Japan, exploring the relationship of travel and tourism in video games. We have Kayde here with us. Thanks for being here.
Hi, I love to be here.
Before we get to the travel and tourism in games, I want to ask about, you recently wrote an article for Super Level about the indie game scene in Japan and how it's still in a fledgling state, which surprises me. And you mentioned like a lack of funding and the fact that crowdsourcing sites like Kickstarter are all in English, so doesn't work for a lot of people in Japan. But I'm curious about like the Japanese public. Like, are the gamers over there interested in indie games?
So the indie game history in Japan is a little bit different. For the longest time, I mean, up until recently, so to speak, there weren't even indie games. There were doujin games, what you would probably describe as, fan games. They were distributed for free, or there was no expectation of becoming like successful with them in any way. Fans just made games dedicated to universes that they had already known and distributed them for free, and that was it. That was basically a small scale community that had existed before basically indie games became a thing.
Okay, but as far as like obviously it sounds like developers are in a fledgling state as far as indies because of the lack of funding, like you meant, but or like you said, but like, is there a market for it at this point, do you think? Are people like really chomping at the bit, like, boy, I wish we could play something?
Yeah, so for the article, when I went into the research, I spoke to different people and to different organizations, and the gist of what I found out was it really is only changing now, and it has been and had been in a fledgling state for quite some time, up until very recently, and that is definitely because the lack of funding also meant that a lot of these game developers cannot sustain a healthy or balanced life to develop games in their free time. This really ties into some problems that Japanese society already has, which refers to like the long hours of working that you already have to do in your regular full-time job. And most of these game developers have a regular full-time job that doesn't have anything to do with developing games. So they do this in their free time. And they do this in their free time without any prospect of being paid for it. So like you had already mentioned, Kickstarter is often not an option. So the only money that can get from that you could get from developing those games comes only after publishing. And that is really a big gamble that a lot of these people take.
Mm-hmm. You do mention in the article that lots of big names are now starting to invest in the Japanese indie game scene, Microsoft, Sony, Konami, all that. Are there any devs or games that you know of that we should be looking out for, like now that this is becoming more of a thing?
I couldn't mention you a game directly right now, but let me think about it for a second, because I just went to Bit Summit, which is a conference in Kyoto that I think takes place every year, and it's a really big conference for all the indie game developers in Japan. But I noticed that, and this was told to me by Takagi Ichijo. He's a game developer who works at Asobo Dev, who I interviewed for the article. He told me that he looks at conferences like Bit Summit a little bit with worry or with concern, because although he enjoys and welcomes the support by the big developers, he questions by the big game companies, he questions whether the presence of PlayStation and Nintendo really make whether that's still like an indie game conference if they are there at Bit Summit. And they were there. They had a really, really massive presence. And those games that they featured were already quite successful. For example, Stray was featured at at one of the booths. And obviously Stray is not like technically a Japanese indie game. So it was a mix of international indie games as well as Japanese indie game developers. And I think looking at these like different intersections and where indie game still dominates, and that on the Japan side is still struggling even at these like international conferences, I think is very interesting.
Yeah. It's a good point that, you know, if you've got the major players there, well, it's not really indie, is it?
Yeah.
So, okay, moving on to tourism in games. Let's start with, as generally as possible, what is tourism in games?
So I am interested in the way we travel inside games. And the first example I usually give people when I start talking about this is how many games nowadays have in-game photography as a function. And in-game photography hasn't always been a thing in video games, even though, you know, taking screenshots of games has probably always been a thing. But more recently, games go like, you know, the further step to implement some kind of camera. Either they give you a camera inside the story, or there's a function that takes you to the menu and you have to activate it. And then there's different like filters to play with. And I think the most like advanced or intricate in-game photography system I've seen so far is in Ghost of Tsushima, where you can really, you know, adjust the time, add particles, change the facial expressions of the protagonist you're playing, and but often I refer to, you know, you as the player wanting to capture these moments. Either it's you standing in some beautiful scenery, or you find this interesting building and you take a photo of it. And that, in a way, for me, is already an indicator that the way we play often has something to do with traveling or tourism, the way we appropriate spaces and we, you know, admire sceneries or cityscapes.
Right, and you bring this up in, you did a talk for Crossroads number 35, and you talk about the game photography becoming a core game mechanic, and it did get me thinking about, for me, I thought Breath of the Wild. Which, and the question that brought me to, though I do think you answered this in that talk, but I'll ask it anyway, but is this concept exclusive to virtual representations of real world places, or can you be a tourist in a fantasy land, you know, like Breath of the Wild?
Yeah, so this is a good question, because I think a lot of people think that tourism can only, or this kind of tourism can only, you know, happen, or it's most obvious when it happens to places in video games that are styled after real places. So when I say, for example, the New York in Spider-Man, I think in the PlayStation 4 game, a lot of people loved the way New York was made, and they loved how you could swing through these buildings, and you could really, even if you've never been to New York, you could really get like a sense of what it's like to be in New York, right? The hustle and bustle, and all these people walking the roads, and the cars, the taxis, and all of that, you know, it should be taken into consideration when we talk about like what it means to travel inside these worlds. But I would say that it is definitely impossible. I mean, not the opposite. It's definitely possible for you to feel a sense of, you know, a sense of travel, a sense of tourism, even in worlds that are completely fictional. I mean, these worlds are usually sustained through or inspired by other pieces of literature or media that we already know. So the Tolkien universe, Lord of the Rings, these, you know, texts and these fantasies and these like images of these places, they've been around for well, not centuries, but definitely for decades. And these images and the way we fantasize about them, they all play into how we design video game worlds and how authentic, I don't really like using that word, but how authentic we conceive a game space to be according to these images and fantasies that we already have, or these conceptions that we already have about these places. So I think it is definitely possible to travel or to feel a sense of tourism in these like completely fictional worlds, simply because we always take inspiration from other media or from other places that will sustain that experience.
And then, so is it tied to a specific type of game? Like could I be a tourist in Super Mario World?
That is a good question. I do think that tourism in video games has been made more obvious because of the recent technological advancements that is accessible to, normal people like us, that we can have consoles and PCs that simulate these massive worlds. And so obviously open world games, I think, are the most common answer here to address like what genre would enable this kind of experience. But I would argue against saying that they are the only way to give such an experience. I think the earliest game that, for example, that I found that featured in-game photography as a game mechanic was, I forgot the name, but it was like a safari game, and it was in the early 2000s. You had to go around in a car while taking pictures of animals. Does that give you a sense of tourism? Maybe not, because technological advancements or limitations, the games at the time were just not like that fascinating. Well, not as fascinating as they are now. But I think that component has always been there. I remember reading an article by a games study scholar who interviewed many people, and what they found interesting in exploring, I think, the worlds of World of Warcraft, and that was like in 2004, and some of them said that they just really enjoyed being in the game world, and they just enjoyed finding a landscape that was interesting, and they felt like as if they were going somewhere exotic.
So this kind of brings me to, so in your article, Recreating Disney Converging Game World Architecture in Kingdom Hearts, you mentioned for something to be a tourist experience, well, maybe I shouldn't put it that way, but I'm asking, for something to be a tourist experience, like, do you need to be awed? You mentioned, like, you get the Frozen Palace is something to gaze upon, and that's a reward, and that's a tourist experience. And it made me think of in Diablo 4, there's at least one part in the game where you just press a button and you get this nice, like, it changes the camera, so you get this nice picturesque view of this specific area. And I thought, but Diablo 4 is scary for the character, presumably. As a player, I'm separate from that, so I can just be awed. But it did make me think of you've said you weren't enjoying Elden Ring because it's scary, it's dark, and all that.
Yes.
So what does that mean for your tourist experience in Elden Ring?
I think the Frozen Palace that you were talking about, I think I was writing about that in the context of the concept of rewarding visitors. So usually the player will, so in terms of game design, the player will usually go through a level that's a bit more, tense and stressful. I think The Last of Us would be a good example, where you often have to go through these levels where there's just an immense amount of clickers, you have to dodge them, the space is very limited, you can't do much, your agency is limited, and it feels just like woefully uncomfortable being in a dark space, and you have like 6 clickers around you who all make these like crazy sounds, right? But then you conquer this place, and then you get out and you see, these giraffes, right? And it's like a really beautiful moment, and it also gives you a shot of the landscape, and it makes you feel at ease, and that's what a lot of games do nowadays. And I like that you mentioned, so I have bought it, but I haven't played it yet, so in Diablo 4, but there's an exact same scene in the newest Star Wars game in Jedi Survivor, where I think in the whole story it never happens, it only happens once, but then I climb on this mountain, and it's part of the main story, and then the camera does something on its own, and that just hasn't happened in the whole game, where it then pans towards like this whole, like the planet, and I can see it, and the character, the protagonist, Cal Kestis, he goes something like, look at that, wow, what a view. And The Last of Us has that a lot too. And I think that's the game intentionally pushing you towards that tourist experience. I don't know if that always works, because I do think part of that tourist experience is for you to discover these sites yourself. But there seems to be, as in games are picking up on that sense of that sensitivity of that, wow, look at that. It is really, not to ramble on too much, but that is a concept that has existed in art, for example, a lot, landscape paintings or painters who will, I think one of those painters I'm thinking about is Caspar David Friedrich, if that says anything. I don't know.
Not to me, because I don't know anything about art, but I'm sure to someone it does.
But yeah, I think he had that really famous painting where you see a man on top of like rocks, and you see the man from like the back, and the man is looking at this like it's God, what was the painting's name? I forgot. But that's like if you type in Caspar David Friedrich, it's literally the first painting that will come up. I promise.
Okay.
So, but yeah, like you see, this is something that has been going on for a long time. And I think video games are, because they are able to do so nowadays, they are picking up on these things.
Sorry, I still wonder about...
It's okay.
Like, Elden Ring, again, can you be a tourist in a game that is, like, terrifying you?
Yes. I feel yes. Because, like, I'll be honest with you, Elden Ring wasn't just, like... It was terrifying, not the entire time, because I really enjoyed the exploration part. It was a really good game when it came to exploration. It gives you this big glowing tree right from the beginning, and you just go like, oh, I wonder what that is. And you don't really get to it immediately, obviously, but then as you try to make your way there, you find other things, and then you kind of go like, oh, maybe I can come back to this, and you slowly, make your way throughout the map and throughout the enemies. And this is a personal thing. I'm just really bad with horror games. And I mean, Elden Ring is not a horror game, I know, but every time I had to go into like a cave or a dungeon, I just couldn't handle it. I hated the undead, the statues that would come to life, the monsters that would jump at you from the ceiling. And I was just always asking myself, why is the game doing this to me? So I really enjoy the fights. I really do, against the bosses. But the caves were something that I really did not enjoy. Yeah.
You mentioned how it seems like devs are kind of picking up on this whole tourist thing and really leaning into it. And again, in that Kingdom Hearts article, you talk about Kingdom Hearts 3 forcing the player to explore the Big Hero 6 city, like forcing them to do this flying around, running around, and really getting that whole experience. And it made me wonder, like, sometimes I'm playing a game, for example, that Diablo 4 thing, when it does the whole camera, whatever. And I do wonder, I'm like, is this for me, or is this the developer being like, hey, I put a lot of work into this and you're going to see it? Like, who is this for?
Yes, I think you as the player then become questioned in your agency, right? Because you want to have your own gaming experience and not someone else's. That's why, open world games try, or at least that's what they always, say they try to do, is that you get to have an individual experience. You get to explore the way you want to do, and at your own pace, and the way you play might not be the exact same way that someone else might play this game, and you may encounter different quests. So this is the experience I had with Red Dead Redemption 2. Currently I'm watching my partner play it, and I'm astonished by how differently he plays. He's been going around hunting all kinds of animals, and I never really touched that unless I had to. And so his gaming experience was very different. And with Kingdom Hearts, the problem is that I feel like it is very prescribed in the way it's made and designed, and it's only in specific moments where you have a little bit more freedom, but overall it's a very, it's like it plays like a written script. And games are always kind of a written script, but how well they mask it is a different question. Right.
Before we continue down this path, something from your stream that we need to settle right now. Burrito or kebab, which is better?
Kebab, of course.
Oh, of course.
But Burrito Cat, as in like my, I usually go by the name Kayde, but sometimes that one's taken. So then I go for Burrito Cat. And then Burrito Cat just sounds better than Kebab Cat, I think.
Okay. in your stream, you were talking about your favorite fast foods, and you went to burrito, and then someone brought up kebab, and you went, oh, right, yes.
I try to, because like kebab isn't the most obvious thing I can get in Japan. In Kyoto, it's actually very hard to find good kebab. There are some, but I do have to walk a little bit, so it's not something like super accessible. But where I'm really from, like in Germany, kebab, or how we call them, döner, you can get them at every corner. And I guess I try to not think too much about it, because that's the only thing that really makes me want to like go back home immediately. Yeah.
Oh, well, I apologize for bringing it up then.
No, that's okay.
What is your current beef with the current Apex season? You're not into the ranked system.
Well, so disclaimer, I am currently master, and that is like the second highest rank you can have. The highest being Apex Predator, and that is, I think, only 750 people per platform can be in that rank at any given time. And if you look up some stats for the current season, over 23% of the whole community is in Masters, and that's not how it's supposed to be. Like the upper brackets are supposed to be maybe 2 or 3%, and I think for Masters it should be like maybe 1%. The fact that 23% of the player base has achieved this rank this season means that something is very, very wrong with the ranked season. But my friends and I, we did it, and I mean, I guess I am happy about it, but it definitely feels a bit undeserved.
Do you find that like the people you play against, would you consider them at a higher level than you're used to, or like do they feel like masters or no?
So right before I hit Masters, when I was so I always play with two friends, shout out to them, and I was the one who was hitting Masters first, because I was always playing the most, because there's I sometimes also play with my brother, but he isn't always around. So but usually when we play, I'm always there, so I think that's why I hit Masters first. But when we were in the diamond lobbies, I remember that it felt very easy. I was like getting these kills, and I was remembering a few seasons back when I was also hitting diamond, and the lobbies felt so horrendous. Like I could tell that this is where my skills were completely like limited. This is where I would stop. That's the feeling that I got. I was happy just to make it to diamond, and then this season it felt very weird. It felt like playing normal games. But then when I did hit Masters in our group and the other two still didn't, we had to really configure our playstyle. And we did what a lot of people did this season, which is to hide for the longest time possible until you become second or third place. And this is how I guess 23% of the player base made it to Master this season.
That's how I got my first Fortnite win. I just hid in a bush basically until there was one guy left.
I mean, I think if you're new to the game, that's fine, but I feel like if that's the ranked system strategy, then that is not quite, like, of course you have to be careful, but if the goal is quite literally to be second, even if you don't pick up any gun, but just, sit in a corner somewhere for the longest time, find a good spot, I think then it might be something wrong with the game. Who knows what they'll do next season.
Yeah. All right, going back to tourism in games. So you wrote Cool Games, Cool Japan, and you talked about Cyberpunk 2077 and Ghost of Tsushima, and I wondered, especially with Ghost of Tsushima, is the cultural and the scenic beauty expressed that you talk about, you talk about how it helps, the tourism industry in Japan, essentially, because it's so beautiful and people get inspired to want to go see the real things. But I'm wondering, is that something actively influenced? Like, that game, was the Japanese government like, oh, we really need to make sure this gets out there? Or is it just like a nice byproduct for them? Like, the developers made this game and then cool, Japan gets more tourism out of it.
So it's definitely an exaggeration to say that, the government tried to push this and they were aiming for this, because we can't forget that, the developers, Sucker Punch Productions, they are still based in America, and they What I found interesting though through the development process, and the producers were quite open about it when they were, interviewed for different game magazines about what kind of research they did. They said they traveled to Japan, and they said that they went to, that island, which was also called Tsushima, and they had someone from like the local authorities, from the local tourism organization, tell them or lead them around, give them historical context. Also on their advisor team, consulting team, they had a lot of Japanese people. I did not look up in like what kind of experts they were, but I am assuming, probably consulting in aspects of history, aspects of language perhaps, or architecture, or whatever. So I think they did pretty good research in order to detailed research in order to make this game, and it's also interesting to me that when the game came out, the local government of, I think, the prefecture that Tsushima belongs to is, I think, Nagasaki. So on the website of Nagasaki, for a while you could go there and then you would see Jin, who's the protagonist from Ghost of Tsushima, and then you could click on that, and then there was like this whole collab basically between, so official website between Ghost of Tsushima and the local tourism authorities of Nagasaki, and they were detailing the island history, bits of history about the island, the local food, that you can really still see, and the foundations of the castle that had been destroyed at some point. And I thought that was quite interesting. Again, it's not something that the government really pushes, and I would really like to know, and that is something that I'm lacking in knowledge, unfortunately. But I wonder how that collaboration came to be, whether this was intended from the start, or whether that was, like you say, a byproduct. But that's some food for thought,
Yeah, and then similarly, you've described Kingdom Hearts, the whole series, as a sort of virtual theme park, in that it converges lots of different stories and media into one entity, and you visit all these different worlds as if you were in Disneyland for real. So is the game, is that something that when Disney and Square Enix got together, was Disney like, look, we want to entice players to visit the real thing, or is it its own celebration of this world,
Mm-hmm. I think I haven't. I'm trying to remember the story behind how Kingdom Hearts came to be, and I believe it was just a coincidental meeting between two executives, one from Square Enix and one from Disney, who just randomly met in an elevator. I think that is how the legend goes. So I will say that I don't think Disney had, because we like to talk about Disney being this evil company that buys out franchises, makes it their own, and with the current strikes, I think that is very fair it's very fair to criticize Disney. But in this regard, I wouldn't actually say that Disney really tried to push some kind of agenda when it comes to how Kingdom Hearts designs their worlds. I think genuinely that Kingdom Hearts was trying to find inspiration from Disney, and were asking themselves how can we turn that into worlds. And that the fact that I compare Kingdom Hearts to Disneyland isn't just because Kingdom Hearts has Disney characters and Disney worlds and Disney stories in them. It was more of a point to illustrate how much video games usually take over from ideas of a theme park. And that refers to, for example, the spatial design, that things have to be themed. So Red Dead Redemption, for example, I would say is themed like a Western, and whereas you have Cyberpunk 2077 that is themed after the whole Cyberpunk genre. And if you think about it like that, Kingdom Hearts just brings out the more obvious points of video games already.
Right. Is the tourism and the escapism of games, is it different than what you could get out of, say, reading a book?
Oh yeah, I would say yes. I mean, while I do think that whenever we engage with anything like a book or a video game, we have to be like actively accepting the fact that we are participating in this world, right? But I would say for video games, it takes more than just being like accepting the fact that you are now playing a video game, but also being continuously engaged with it. So you will have to keep using your mouse, your keyboard, your controller. You will have to keep using inputs, or you will be prompted with dialogue options, so stuff like that. So this happens procedurally, and you cannot, like, if you want to continue playing, you can't really stop it. And I think this is, and for books, it's like the option is you either read it or you don't. And it's a very like simple decision to do. Video games engage you in a very different way. I mean, depending on how you see it, you could say, so for me, the movement that you do in games is very real in the sense that we are connected through direct inputs with some kind of computer interface, and these inputs, happen in real time, and I think that inherently already changes the way we approach video games as opposed to a lot of other media around us.
At your doctoral research progress presentation earlier this month, you had one advisor not convinced that play can be tourism.
Yes.
How will you go about convincing them next time, or have you thought about that yet?
Yes. So I just a disclaimer, this advisor also had like apologized to me through email. So I'm very grateful for that email and that he apologized, and he said like to not take it personally. And he did say, like, immediately after I did my presentation, he did say that it would be impossible to convince him, because I jokingly said, haha, next time I'll convince you. But he was very adamant about saying that it was impossible, which made my desire to challenge him probably even bigger. It goes back to what I said, that we have to actively accept the fact that we're playing a video game. And for him, I mean, it seems like for him, playing a video game is just not something he personally would do, and he couldn't even grasp the idea of playing something, holding a controller, and then that, comparing that to like traveling. And that leads, I mean, I'm often occupied with space and like the way games are designed for the player, and often the blind spot that I have, it sounds like as if the player is just, they're just going somewhere where the designer wants them to be. And sometimes that's true. But I do think for traveling, and like whether that's real places or digital places, you as the player, you still at the center of it. You have to be the one who actively decides to say, yes, I want to be part of this world. Or, because sometimes people, they are taken out of the immersion, even if they're playing games, and they usually like to play games. But games can be sometimes badly designed that somehow, disturbs the immersion, whether that's like bugs or glitches, or, the sounds are off, or things like that. And it takes a high, well, not high, but it definitely takes the first step from the player to say, I want to be like involved in this. I want to be part of this. And I don't know if that'll convince him. I mean, I'll probably try to convince him with some other arguments as well. But I think that is like the main problem that he had. And that really goes for anyone who doesn't like games, right? And if that's the case, then so be it.
How far can we equate virtual travel with the real thing, for lack of a better term? Like, you're a scuba diver. Would you equate exploring underwater areas in video games with actually being, underwater?
So it's nice that you bring that up. Because when I did my scuba diving license, I was thinking to myself, concepts of immersion in video games. And immersion has always been a really big and often used term in video game studies, to the point where people say, yeah, but if everything is immersive, then nothing is, And I think one of the earlier scholars had also criticized, the use of immersion in general, because if you go back to the history of the terminology, and I don't want to bring up the many details of this, but immersion means, being immersed in a body of water. And what happens when you immerse yourself in a body of water? You drown. Okay. And when I was scuba diving, I thought, well, yeah, I mean, that's true. At the same time, I had to take a theory course, and I was practicing in a pool beforehand. I had to learn how to deal with my equipment, how to breathe underwater. I had an instructor. And so, again, it was a very active part of me to say that, okay, I'm going to go into this body of water, but I have all this equipment that will, make me able to breathe underwater, otherwise I'll die. And just knowing this consciously really kind of made me not just respect scuba diving, but also think about what it takes to play a game, and your, wanting to be part of this world. And knowing that I need all of this gear, and I know that I can also, if something goes wrong, go up to the surface again. And, mind you, keeping up with some, safety regulations. But I mean, that's the same for playing video games, I would say. I mean, in order to be immersed, you have to know the rules, accept the game world, the rules that the game imposes on you. And though I would say probably speedrunners don't do that. So scuba diving actually taught me a lot about video games, quite literally, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I think that goes back to what you were saying about you decide how immersed you are, I guess, is you have to, okay, am I willing to put the time in to be good enough to see all of this?
Yes, I completely agree.
All right, well, we're winding down, but I'll ask, where do you see tourism in games going from here, or what would you like to see? Where should games take this?
It's a very good question. Can't say I've really thought about this, but I do think so. There has been a lot of research already on how games have been contributing to local tourism, because people or local authorities develop apps, or I don't know, museums try to rebuild lost sites that were destroyed by terrorist organizations, and those always play into the idea of digital spaces. And although there has been a lot of research on that side, on the reverse sides of what I'm trying to do, there hasn't been a lot. And it's like the chicken or the egg question: what came first? Do we all experience real spaces first and then we play video games, or do we play video games first and then we go to these places that we know from video games? And I think video games have a real capacity of educating in a incredibly entertaining way about history, about current issues, about, for example, the climate crisis. They can be very, very educational, and at the same time they can be also very, I don't want to say dangerous, but if you leave a lot of things if you view a lot of things uncritically, I think it could also just pan over to the complete other side of, instead of being educational. Specifically talking about games like Call of Duty, and even though they're incredibly entertaining, I would say, and I haven't written about that yet, but it's like a kind of war tourism. So they kind of lead you through stations of history, but it's all very murky and it's all very, one-sided, because it's more like watching or playing a Hollywood film on war. And I think I wish that even though games already know the kind of potential that they have when it comes to this kind of storytelling or the way that they can engage the players, I wish they would be more critical of themselves. And that, I guess, doesn't apply just for tourism in video games, but just video games in general.
Cool. Well, where can people keep up to date with you?
So on the I would love to say on the Bird platform, but I am not allowed to say that anymore, I guess. But yeah, I have a Twitch account. I stream there very, very irregularly. I have all kinds of other social media. Instagram is very like personal and private, but still public if you want to follow that. But yeah, I mean, I'm still on the Twitter platform, and probably will stay on it until it goes down, whenever that'll be.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat.
Yeah, I've tried so many other, like the dupes and all and I kept thinking, I'm just feeding a lot of platforms my data for no reason, and then I just stop using it. So I might as well just stay on Twitter. So.
Yeah. Well, Kayde, thank you so much.
Thank you.